The scream that shattered the dawn silence of Millbrook would echo through the corridors of Sacred Heart Parish for decades to come. It was 6:57 a.m. on a crisp November morning when Thomas Whitfield, the parish groundskeeper, stumbled backward from the ancient sycamore tree, his weathered hands trembling as he crossed himself repeatedly. The rake fell from his grasp, clattering against the stone pathway like bones against marble. "Sweet Mother of God," he whispered, his voice barely audible above the rustling autumn leaves. They've crucified her." Before we dive into this powerful story of faith, redemption, and the courage to face buried truths, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us share more inspiring stories that touch hearts and strengthen faith. Now, let's begin. There, suspended from the thick branch that had sheltered generations of faithful, hung the marble statue of the Blessed Virgin Mary. But this was no act of reverence. The pristine white figure swayed grotesquely in the morning breeze, a coarse rope around her neck, her serene face now streaked with what appeared to be dried blood, though whether real or paint, no one could say. The statue's flowing robes, once symbols of purity and grace, were torn and stained. Her hands, traditionally clasped in prayer, had been bound behind her back with barbed wire. Most disturbing of all, someone had carved a single word into the tree's bark, just below the hanging figure: "Remember." Within minutes, the discovery spread through Millbrook like wildfire through dry wheat. Maria Santos, rushing to prepare the altar for morning mass, dropped her keys when she saw the crowd gathering. Her rosary beads clicked frantically as she pushed through the growing cluster of horrified parishioners, their faces pale as communion wafers in the grey dawn light. "Call Father Rodriguez!" she shouted, her voice cracking with emotion. "Call the police. Call someone." But the damage was already done. In the age of smartphones and social media, the image had already begun its viral journey across the internet. By 8 a.m., news vans would line Cathedral Street. By noon, the story would reach national headlines. Virgin Mary statue found hanged in small-town church. Hate crime or something more sinister? Father Gabriel Rodriguez emerged from the rectory like a man walking toward his own execution. At 34, he was young for a parish priest. His dark eyes, usually warm with compassion, now wide with shock and something deeper. A recognition that seemed to pierce through the growing crowd straight to the heart of an old, buried secret. He had been in Millbrook for only 18 months, but he knew the stories. Every parish had them. Whispered tales of tragedy, of sins covered rather than confessed, of truths buried so deep they seemed to poison the very ground they lay beneath. The sycamore tree itself had always made him uneasy. Unlike the other trees that dotted the church grounds with their neat, predictable growth, this ancient giant twisted skyward in an almost violent spiral, its branches reaching in all directions like arthritic fingers clawing at heaven itself. The older parishioners rarely spoke of it directly, but Father Rodriguez had noticed how they crossed themselves when passing beneath its shadow, how children seemed instinctively to play elsewhere, how even the boldest teenagers avoided the benches, positioned near its massive trunk. Now he understood why. "Everyone, please step back," he called out, his voice carrying the authority of his office, despite the tremor he couldn't quite suppress. This is sacred ground. We must treat it with reverence, even now." But Detective Sarah Chen, arriving with the first wave of police officers, had different priorities. She surveyed the scene with the cold, analytical eye of someone who had seen humanity's capacity for both cruelty and madness. Yellow tape began to cordon off the area, transforming the peaceful church grounds into a crime scene. "Father," Detective Chen approached Rodriguez with professional courtesy, tinged with genuine concern. "I need to ask, has your parish received any threats recently? Any conflicts with community members? Anything that might explain this?" Father Rodriguez looked up at the desecrated statue, then at the word carved into the bark: "Remember." His throat tightened as fragments of conversations, half-heard confessions, and carefully avoided topics suddenly coalesced into a pattern he had been unconsciously assembling since his arrival. "Detective Chen," he said slowly, "I think this isn't about what we've done. I think it's about what we've forgotten." As if summoned by his words, Eleanor Brennan stepped forward from the crowd. At 78, she was the undisputed matriarch of Sacred Heart Parish, her family's name etched into the cornerstone of the church itself. Her silver hair was perfectly styled despite the early hour, her navy dress impeccable, but her hands shook as she clutched her worn leather prayer book. "Father." Her voice carried the weight of decades. "There's something you need to know. Something we should have told you when you arrived." The crowd pressed closer, sensing that whatever Mrs. Brennan was about to reveal would be far more significant than the morning's shocking discovery. Even Detective Chen paused in her documentation, her pen hovering over her notepad. 23 years ago, Mrs. Brennan began, her voice growing stronger with each word, a young woman died beneath this tree. Her name was Isabella Cruz, and she was only 19 years old. A collective intake of breath swept through the gathered parishioners. Some crossed themselves, others looked away, but none seemed surprised. This was not new information. It was simply information that had been consciously, deliberately kept silent. "Isabella was our choir director's daughter," Mrs. Brennan continued, her eyes fixed on the hanging statue. "Beautiful voice, beautiful heart, beautiful faith. She had dreams of becoming a missionary, of serving God in the furthest corners of the world." Father Rodriguez felt ice forming in his veins. "What happened to her?" The silence stretched like a taut wire, ready to snap. Finally, Mrs. Brennan spoke the words that would shatter 23 years of careful silence. "She was found hanging from this very tree, Father. Just like Mary is hanging now. And just like now, someone had carved a single word into the bark." Her voice dropped to a whisper that somehow carried clearly across the entire crowd. The word was justice. Detective Chen's pen had stopped moving entirely. The morning had suddenly become about much more than vandalism or religious hatred. It had become about the past refusing to stay buried, about truth clawing its way back to the surface, about a community forced to confront the sins it had spent more than 2 decades trying to forget. As if responding to the revelation, the morning wind picked up, causing the desecrated statue to sway more violently. The rope creaked against the ancient branch, and for one heart-stopping moment, it seemed as though the marble virgin might be nodding, acknowledging perhaps that the time for silence had finally ended. Father Rodriguez looked around at his parishioners, these people he had grown to love, who had welcomed him with such warmth, who had seemed so united in their faith. Now he saw something else in their faces: guilt, fear, and the unmistakable weight of shared secrets. "Detective Chen," he said quietly, his voice carrying across the churchyard with startling clarity, "I believe we need to reopen the case of Isabella Cruz. And I believe," he looked up at the hanging statue, then back at his congregation, "that someone in this parish knows exactly why both Isabella and Mary are sending us the same message." The word, remember, seemed to pulse in the carved bark, as if the tree itself was alive with memory, demanding acknowledgement of truths too long denied. And in that moment, Father Gabriel Rodriguez realized that his quiet posting to this peaceful parish was about to become something far more challenging than he had ever imagined. The real test of his faith was just beginning. The emergency parish council meeting that evening crackled with tension thicker than incense during High Mass. 7 members sat around the oak table in the rectory's study, their faces illuminated by flickering candlelight that cast dancing shadows on the wood-panelled walls. Father Rodriguez had deliberately chosen candles over electric lighting, hoping their warm glow might soften the harsh realities they were about to confront. Instead, the flames seemed to make every expression more dramatic, every silence more ominous. "We need to address what Eleanor shared this morning," Father Rodriguez began, his hands folded atop a manila folder thick with documents he'd spent the afternoon collecting from the parish archives. "I've been researching the circumstances surrounding Isabella Cruz's death, and I've found inconsistencies." Margaret Sullivan, the parish secretary for over 30 years, shifted uncomfortably in her chair. Her usually immaculate appearance was disheveled, silver hair escaping from its customary bun, makeup slightly smeared as if she'd been crying. "Father," she said carefully, "some things are better left undisturbed." The Cruz family. They moved away shortly after Isabella's passing. They found peace. Why should we drag them back into pain? Because someone is already dragging us all back into it, Dr. James Patterson interjected sharply. At 62, he was Millbrook's only psychiatrist and had served on the council for 15 years. His clinical training made him uncomfortable with anything that couldn't be rationally explained. Whoever desecrated that statue knows about Isabella. They're making a deliberate connection. We can't ignore that. Eleanor Brennan, who had remained silent since her morning revelation, finally spoke. Her voice was steady, but her hands trembled as they gripped her coffee cup. I need to tell you all something I should have said 23 years ago. She paused, seeming to gather strength from some internal reservoir. Isabella didn't commit suicide. The words hit the room like a physical blow. Several council members gasped. Others leaned forward as if they hadn't heard correctly. Eleanor, please, Margaret whispered. You can't make accusations without proof. I have proof, Eleanor interrupted, her voice growing stronger. I have Isabella's diary. I've had it for 23 years. Father Rodriguez felt his heart stop. What? Eleanor reached into her large handbag and withdrew a leather-bound journal, its pages yellowed with age, its cover worn smooth by years of handling. She placed it gently on the table as if it were a sacred relic. Isabella's mother gave this to me the day before they left town. She said Isabella would have wanted me to have it, but she couldn't bear to read what was inside. She asked me to keep it safe, to remember her daughter as she truly was. The room fell into complete silence, except for the soft hiss of the candle flames and the distant sound of evening traffic on Cathedral Street. I read it, Eleanor continued, her voice now barely above a whisper. Every page, every entry. And what I found, she looked around the table, meeting each pair of eyes in turn. Isabella was being blackmailed. The word hung in the air like a curse. Father Rodriguez reached for the diary with trembling hands, but Eleanor held it protectively against her chest. Before I show you this, she said, you need to understand that what we learn tonight changes everything. Once we know the truth, we can't unknow it. We can't go back to the comfortable lies we've been living with. Dr. Patterson leaned forward, his professional curiosity overriding his discomfort. What kind of blackmail, Eleanor? Who was threatening her? Eleanor's eyes filled with tears, but her voice remained steady. Isabella discovered that someone in the parish was embezzling money from the building fund. A lot of money. Money that was supposed to go toward the new children's centre. She opened the diary to a page marked with a faded ribbon and began to read in Isabella's own words, written in careful cursive script. March 15th. I can't believe what I saw today. I stayed late to practice the Easter solo, and I heard voices from Father Morrison's office. I thought maybe someone needed help, so I went to check. The door was slightly open, and I could see inside. Mr. Hendricks was there with a briefcase full of money, cash, lots of it. Father Morrison was counting it and writing in a ledger that definitely wasn't the parish financial records. I heard Mr. Hendricks say, "The families will never know. They think their donations are going toward the children's centre, but we both know that project will never break ground." Father Morrison laughed and said, "Let them dream. Dreams don't cost us anything, but they sure pay well." Eleanor paused, allowing the implications to sink in. The children's centre had been a beloved parish project, something families had sacrificed to support, donating everything from Christmas bonuses to college funds their children had been saving. "There's more," Eleanor said, turning several pages. Isabella documented everything she could. She found out that Robert Hendricks, the former parish treasurer, Margaret interrupted, her face pale. "He moved away suddenly, didn't he?" "Right after Isabella's death." "Yes," Eleanor confirmed. Isabella discovered that he and Father Morrison had been stealing from the parish for almost 3 years. She estimated they had taken over $200,000. Father Rodriguez felt sick. Father Morrison had been his predecessor, beloved by the community, remembered as a saintly man who had served Sacred Heart for over 20 years before retiring and moving to Florida. The thought that such revered figure could have been involved in something so corrupt challenged everything he thought he knew about his parish. "But why didn't Isabella go to the police?" he asked. "Why didn't she report them?" Eleanor turned to the diary's final entries, her voice breaking as she read, "April 10th. They know that I know." Mr. Hendricks approached me after Mass today. He was smiling, but his eyes were scary. He said he heard I'd been asking questions about parish finances and that smart girls sometimes ask too many questions for their own good. He said accidents happen to people who can't mind their own business. "I'm scared, but I can't let them keep stealing from families who trust them. I've decided to write everything down and give copies to the police and the bishop. God will protect me if I'm doing the right thing." The final entry was dated April 12th. "Tomorrow, I'm going to the police. I've made copies of everything and hidden them where they'll be found if anything happens to me. I know this might mean the end of my dreams of missionary work. The scandal will destroy our parish, but I can't let them keep hurting people. I've prayed about this all night, and I believe God is calling me to be brave. If something happens to me, I want everyone to know. I love this parish. I love my faith, and I died trying to protect both. Remember me not as a victim, but as someone who chose truth over comfort. Isabella Cruz." Eleanor closed the diary, tears now flowing freely down her cheeks. The next morning, Isabella was found hanging from the sycamore tree. The police ruled it suicide within hours. No investigation, no questions asked. Father Morrison performed a brief graveside service, and Robert Hendricks quietly disappeared from town that very week. The room erupted in whispers and gasps, but Father Rodriguez raised his hand for silence. His mind was racing, connecting dots that painted a picture so dark it challenged his fundamental belief in the goodness of his calling. "Eleanor," he said carefully, "you said Isabella hid copies of her evidence. Were they ever found?" "That's just it," Eleanor replied, her voice heavy with 23 years of regret. "I never looked for them." None of us did. We were so relieved when the scandal didn't break, when the parish stayed together, that we chose to believe Isabella had been troubled, that her death was a tragic suicide of a disturbed young woman. She looked around the table at the faces of people she'd worshipped alongside for decades. We chose our comfort over Isabella's truth. We chose our reputation over her justice, and someone out there knows it. Detective Chen's voice suddenly cut through the tension from the doorway. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but I think you'll want to hear what we've discovered." Everyone turned to see the detective standing in the entrance, her expression grim. Father Rodriguez realized that in their emotional discussion, they hadn't heard her knock. "Detective, how long have you been—" he began. "Long enough to know that we need to treat Isabella Cruz's death as a homicide," she said, stepping fully into the room. "Because an hour ago we found something hidden in the hollow base of the sycamore tree." She held up an evidence bag containing what appeared to be a metal box, corroded with age but still intact. "I'm betting this contains the evidence Isabella Cruz died trying to preserve. And I'm betting whoever hung that statue knew exactly where to find it." Eleanor Brennan gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. After all these years, Isabella's truth is finally coming to light. Father Rodriguez stood slowly, feeling the weight of revelation settling on his shoulders like a lead cloak. His parish wasn't just dealing with vandalism or religious hatred. They were dealing with murder, corruption, and a cover-up that had lasted more than 2 decades. "Detective Chen," he said quietly, "what you'll find in that box, it's going to destroy a lot of people's faith in this institution." "Father," she replied, her voice not unkind but absolutely resolute, "sometimes faith needs to be destroyed before it can be rebuilt on truth instead of lies." As if summoned by her words, the sound of church bells began to toll across Millbrook. Not the usual call to evening prayer, but something deeper, more mournful. A sound that seemed to carry the weight of 23 years of buried secrets finally clawing their way back to the surface. The reckoning had begun. The metal box sat on Detective Chen's desk like an unexploded bomb, its corroded surface bearing silent testimony to over 2 decades buried beneath the roots of the sycamore tree. Father Rodriguez, Eleanor Brennan, and District Attorney Michael Torres watched as the forensics specialist carefully pried open the container that Isabella Cruz had hidden in her final desperate hours. The morning light streaming through the police station windows seemed almost accusatory as the box yielded its secrets. Inside, wrapped in multiple layers of plastic bags that had somehow survived the years underground, were documents that would shatter the carefully constructed peace of Sacred Heart Parish. "Jesus Christ," whispered D.A. Torres as he examined the first set of photocopied bank statements. "This is comprehensive." Isabella had been methodical in her documentation. Bank routing numbers, forged signatures, altered deposit slips, even photographs she'd secretly taken of meetings between Father Morrison and Robert Hendricks. She had built a case that would have sent both men to prison for decades. But it was the final item in the box that made everyone in the room fall silent. A cassette tape labelled in Isabella's careful handwriting, April 11th, final insurance policy. Detective Chen inserted the tape into an old recorder borrowed from the evidence locker. After a moment of static, Isabella's voice filled the room, young, frightened, but determined. "My name is Isabella Cruz, and if you're listening to this, something has happened to me. I've discovered that Father Morrison and Robert Hendricks have been stealing money from our parish for years. I have proof. I also have reason to believe they know I'm going to expose them." Her voice wavered slightly, but continued with remarkable composure for a 19-year-old girl facing such overwhelming corruption and danger. "Tonight, Robert Hendricks followed me home from choir practice. He didn't try to hide it. He wanted me to know he was watching. When I got to my door, he called out to me from across the street. He said, 'Isabella, smart girls who ask too many questions sometimes have accidents. It would be a shame if something happened to such a faithful young woman.' Then he laughed and drove away." Father Rodriguez closed his eyes, trying to reconcile this image of calculated intimidation with the peaceful parish he thought he knew. "I'm scared, but I'm more angry than scared. These men have stolen from families who can barely afford groceries, who gave their children's college money because they believed in the Children's Center Project. Mrs. Martinez sold her grandmother's jewelry to donate $500. The Johnson family took out a loan against their house. They've been betrayed by the very people they trusted to shepherd their souls." The tape continued with Isabella detailing specific instances of financial manipulation, but it was her final words that left everyone in the room shaken. "If something happens to me, please don't let them make it look like I gave up on God or my faith. I would never do that. I would never leave my family with that burden. If I die, it's because someone killed me to protect their secrets. Don't let my death become their final theft. Remember me as someone who chose truth over safety. And please don't let them keep stealing from people who deserve so much better. Isabella Cruz, April 11th, 10:30 p.m. The tape ended, leaving only the soft hum of the machine and the sound of Detective Chen's pen scratching across her notepad. D.A. Torres was the first to break the silence. "This changes everything. We're not just looking at embezzlement and fraud anymore. We're looking at murder and conspiracy to cover up murder. Father Morrison and Robert Hendricks," Detective Chen said, consulting her notes. "I need to know where they are now, both of them." Eleanor Brennan, who had been crying silently throughout the tape, finally spoke. "Father Morrison retired to Florida about 15 years ago. Sarasota, I think. He sends Christmas cards every year, talking about his peaceful retirement, his garden, his volunteer work at a local parish. And Hendricks? He disappeared right after Isabella's death, Father Rodriguez said. No forwarding address, no contact with anyone from the parish. It was like he evaporated." Detective Chen made more notes. "We'll find them both. But there's something else we need to discuss." She looked directly at Father Rodriguez. "Someone in your current parish knew about this box. Someone knew exactly where Isabella had hidden her evidence. The person who hung that statue and carved 'Remember' into the tree. They led us directly to the proof." The implications hung heavy in the air. After 23 years, someone with intimate knowledge of Isabella's final actions had decided the time had come for justice. "It could be a family member," Eleanor suggested. "Someone who Isabella confided in. Or someone who was there that night." D.A. Torres said grimly. Someone who witnessed what really happened to her. Father Rodriguez felt a chill run down his spine. Detective, are you suggesting that someone in my parish watched Isabella Cruz die and said nothing for 23 years? I'm suggesting that someone in your parish knows exactly what happened that night, and for whatever reason, they've decided now is the time to tell the truth. As if summoned by the conversation, Father Rodriguez's phone buzzed with a text message. The number was unknown, but the message made his blood run cold. The tree remembers everything. Meet me at midnight if you want to know who killed Isabella Cruz. Come alone, or the truth stays buried forever. A friend, Detective Chen, immediately leaned over to read the message. Father, you're not going anywhere alone. This is obviously connected to our investigation. No, Father Rodriguez said, surprising himself with the firmness in his voice. Someone has been carrying this secret for 23 years. They've finally found the courage to speak. If they see police, they might disappear forever, just like the truth did in 1999. Eleanor placed her weathered hand on his arm. Gabriel, you could be walking into a trap. What if whoever killed Isabella is still out there? What if this is their way of silencing you too? Father Rodriguez looked at Isabella's diary, still lying open on Detective Chen's desk, then at the evidence that had been hidden for so long beneath the sacred ground of his parish. Eleanor, for 23 years, your parish chose safety over truth. 23 years ago, a 19-year-old girl was braver than an entire community of adult believers. He stood up, his decision made. I won't dishonor her courage by letting fear guide my choices. Detective Chen shook her head. I can't let you do this, Father. It's too dangerous. You can't stop me either, he replied, his voice carrying an authority he didn't know he possessed. I'll wear a wire, I'll check in every 15 minutes, I'll take every precaution you want. But I'm going to meet whoever sent this message. D.A. Torres looked at Detective Chen, then back at Father Rodriguez. If we do this, and I'm not saying we should, you follow our lead completely. No heroics, no attempts to handle this yourself. At the first sign of danger, you get out. Agreed, Father Rodriguez said immediately. As they began planning the evening's confrontation, none of them noticed the figure watching from across the street through the police station windows. Someone who had been waiting 23 years for this exact moment. Someone who had finally found the courage to speak the truth that had been burning in their heart, like a coal from hell itself. The sycamore tree wasn't the only thing in Millbrook that remembered everything. And tonight, memory would finally have its voice. The Sacred Heart Churchyard at midnight resembled a scene from a Gothic nightmare. Fog had rolled in from the river, transforming familiar landmarks into ghostly silhouettes. The sycamore tree loomed against the overcast sky like a monument to ancient sins, its gnarled branches reaching upward as if clawing for absolution. Father Rodriguez walked slowly along the stone pathway, every shadow potentially concealing either salvation or destruction. The wire taped to his chest felt cold against his skin, Detective Chen's voice a whispered comfort in his earpiece. Visual contact maintained, Father. We're positioned around the perimeter. Remember, any sign of danger, you abort immediately. But as he approached the tree where Isabella Cruz had died, and where the Virgin Mary statue had been found hanging just days before, Father Rodriguez felt a strange sense of peace settle over him. He had spent his entire adult life ministering to people in their darkest moments, and tonight he was about to receive a confession that had been waiting more than 2 decades to be heard. I'm here, he called out softly to the apparently empty churchyard. I've come alone, as you asked. For several moments, only the wind through autumn leaves answered him. Then, from behind the massive trunk of the sycamore, a figure emerged that made Father Rodriguez's heart stop. It was Mrs. Margaret Sullivan, the parish secretary, but she looked nothing like the competent, composed woman who had efficiently managed Sacred Heart's daily operations for 30 years. Her usually perfect appearance was disheveled, her silver hair loose around her shoulders, her clothes wrinkled as if she'd been wearing them for days. Most shocking of all were her eyes, haunted, desperate, filled with a pain so deep it seemed to have carved permanent tracks down her cheeks. Margaret, Father Rodriguez whispered, his voice carrying clearly in the still night air. "You sent the message?" She stepped fully into the moonlight, and he could see that her hands were shaking violently. In one hand, she clutched a manila envelope. In the other, a rosary that looked like it had been worn smooth by decades of desperate prayer. "Father Gabriel," she said, her voice cracking with emotion. "I've been dying for 23 years. Dying a little more each day, each hour, each time someone mentions Isabella's name or talks about her tragic suicide." Through his earpiece, Father Rodriguez could hear Detective Chen coordinating with her team, but he forced himself to focus entirely on the broken woman before him. This was more than a criminal confession. This was a human soul crying out after decades of torment. "Margaret, tell me what happened. Tell me everything." She moved closer to the tree, placing her palm against its bark where the word "remember" had been carved. "I was here that night, Father. I saw everything." The words hung between them like a physical presence, heavy with implications that would shatter everything the parish thought it knew about itself. "I was working late in the parish office, reconciling the books for the quarterly report. I'd been suspicious of the discrepancies for weeks, but I was too afraid to say anything. Robert Hendricks was intimidating, and Father Morrison was so beloved. Who would have believed me?" She opened the manila envelope with trembling fingers and withdrew a set of photographs. Old, slightly faded, but unmistakably clear. "Around 10:30 p.m., I heard voices outside. Angry voices. I looked out the window and saw Isabella with Robert Hendricks near the tree. She was holding papers, shaking them at him, shouting about the children's center money." Father Rodriguez moved closer, studying the photographs in the moonlight. They showed Isabella Cruz, young and beautiful and clearly terrified, backing away from a large man whose face was partially obscured, but whose aggressive posture was unmistakable. I grabbed my camera. I thought maybe if I had pictures of whatever was happening, it might protect Isabella somehow. "I've never been brave, Father, but I couldn't just watch a young girl being threatened." The next photograph showed Isabella running toward the tree, with Hendricks pursuing her. In the background, another figure was emerging from the rectory. Father Morrison came out when he heard the shouting. I prayed that he would help Isabella, that he would protect her from Hendricks. Margaret's voice broke completely. Instead, he helped corner her. Father Rodriguez felt his faith in everything he thought he knew about his calling being systematically destroyed. "Margaret, what exactly did you see?" Isabella was backed against the tree, holding the evidence she'd gathered. She was crying, begging them to just let her go to the police, saying that the families deserved to know the truth. Father Morrison kept saying she was confused, that she misunderstood what she'd seen, that making accusations would destroy the parish and hurt the very people she claimed to want to help. Margaret showed him another photograph. Isabella pressed. Against the sycamore trunk, two men looming over her like predators. Hendricks grabbed the papers from her hands and started tearing them up. Isabella screamed that she had copies hidden, that destroying those wouldn't stop anything. That's when. Margaret paused, closing her eyes as if the memory was too painful to bear. That's when Father Morrison said the words that still haunt me every night. "Then we need to make sure you can never share those copies with anyone." The fog seemed to thicken around them as Margaret continued her devastating testimony. They didn't strangle her, Father. She fought too hard, screamed too loud. Hendricks hit her with something, a piece of wood from the construction site, and she fell, hit her head on the roots of this tree. Margaret was sobbing now, 23 years of suppressed horror pouring out of her. She was still alive, but unconscious. And that's when they decided to make it look like suicide. Father Rodriguez felt physically sick. "Margaret, why didn't you help her? Why didn't you call for help?" "Because I was a coward," she screamed, her voice echoing across the empty churchyard. "Because I was frozen with terror. Because I knew if they could kill a young, innocent girl, they could kill a frightened, middle-aged secretary without even thinking twice about it." Through his earpiece, he could hear Detective Chen's voice. "Father, we need to move in. This confession needs to be officially recorded." But Father Rodriguez held up a hand, knowing that Margaret was finally purging poison that had been destroying her for more than 2 decades. I watched them stage it, she continued, her voice now eerily calm. Watched them put the rope around her neck, hoist her up to make it look like she'd hanged herself. Father Morrison even said a prayer over her body. Can you believe that? He prayed for God to forgive Isabella for taking her own life. The photographs, Margaret. How did you... I took pictures of everything, every horrible moment. I told myself I would use them as evidence, that I would find the courage to go to the police. She laughed bitterly. Instead, I hid them for 23 years and watched that poor girl get buried as a suicide while her killers were praised as pillars of the community. Father Rodriguez looked at the manila envelope, realizing it contained evidence that would not only solve Isabella's murder, but would expose corruption that had poisoned his parish for decades. Margaret, you said you carved "Remember" into the tree. You hung the Virgin Mary statue. I've been having dreams for months, she said, her voice taking on an almost mystical quality. Dreams where Isabella visits me, still 19 years old, still wearing her choir robes. She never accuses me, never angry. She just asks, over and over, when will you remember me? When will you tell them what really happened? She looked up at the branches where both Isabella and the statue had hung. 3 weeks ago, I couldn't take it anymore. I thought if I recreated the scene, if I forced the parish to confront what happened here, maybe someone would finally ask the right questions. And the evidence hidden in the tree? I've known about Isabella's box for 23 years. I saw her hide it the morning of the day she died. After the murder, I almost dug it up a dozen times, but I was too afraid. When I hung the statue, I carved the word deep enough to point directly to where the box was buried. Detective Chen's voice came through his earpiece again. Father, we're moving in. This needs to be taken to the station. As if she could hear the detective's words, Margaret looked directly at Father Rodriguez. They're coming, aren't they? Your police friends? Margaret, you're not in danger. You're the witness we've been looking for. You're the key to getting justice for Isabella. Justice? She laughed, but there was no humor in it. Father, I watched a 19-year-old girl get murdered and said nothing for 23 years. I let her family believe she committed suicide. I let Father Morrison retire with honor and a pension. I let Robert Hendricks disappear without consequences. What kind of justice is that? Before Father Rodriguez could answer, Detective Chen and her team emerged from the fog, weapons drawn but pointed down, approaching with professional caution. Mrs. Sullivan, Detective Chen called out, we need you to come with us. You're not under arrest, but we need to get your statement officially recorded. Margaret looked at the envelope in her hands, then at Father Rodriguez. Will you do something for me, Father? Will you make sure Isabella's family knows the truth? Will you make sure everyone knows she died trying to protect the people she loved? I promise, Father Rodriguez said solemnly, accepting the envelope. Isabella's story will be told. Her courage will be remembered. As Detective Chen approached with handcuffs held loosely at her side, Margaret Sullivan finally looked peaceful for the first time in 23 years. Thank you, Father. I can finally sleep now. The arrest of Margaret Sullivan shocked Millbrook even more than the desecrated statue. News vans crowded Cathedral Street, but inside Sacred Heart Rectory, Father Rodriguez faced a deeper crisis. His faith in the institution itself. Spread across his desk were Margaret's photographs, proof of Isabella Cruz's final hours. District Attorney Torres pressed questions about Father Morrison and Robert Hendricks. Rodriguez recalled only that Morrison had been praised as a faithful priest at retirement. Margaret had presented flawless books, leaving no hint of theft. Torres then revealed the truth. Morrison was alive in Sarasota, but Hendricks had died years earlier in a suspiciously wealthy state. Together, they had stolen over $500,000 meant for the Parish Children's Center. Plans were made to arrest Morrison that very afternoon. Before justice could come, Detective Chen arrived with grim news. Morrison was dead. He had taken an overdose and left a confession. In it, he admitted Isabella had discovered the embezzlement. They had meant to silence her, he claimed, but panicked after Hendricks struck her. He also left records showing more than $600,000 siphoned from parishioners' sacrifices. The letter mentioned Margaret, noting how she seemed haunted, staring at him during Mass. Rodriguez understood. Guilt. She had lived in silent penance, keeping the parish books immaculate and serving tirelessly, not for greed, but atonement. No, he told Torres firmly. Margaret was complicit in silence, but not theft. Every act of service was her attempt to balance the scales. From the rectory window, Rodriguez looked at the sycamore tree that had witnessed it all. For the first time, he saw a path forward. Isabella would have the memorial she had been denied, and every family would learn the truth of what had been stolen. The truth is finally free, he said. Now comes the harder work of living with it. 6 months after Margaret Sullivan's midnight confession, Sacred Heart Parish was unrecognizable. The sycamore tree, once a symbol of buried shame, now stood in a memorial garden filled with flowers, plaques, and a bronze statue of Isabella Cruz. Beneath it, her words were carved in stone. Remember me not as a victim, but as someone who chose truth over safety. On the day of the dedication, the church overflowed. Isabella's family returned from California, her aging parents, her brother, her cousins. Parish historian Eleanor Brennan had documented Isabella's life, ensuring her dreams were remembered alongside her death. Margaret herself was absent, serving a short prison term after insisting she must pay for my silence. Father Rodriguez began the Mass by naming the community's failure. We chose silence and dishonored Isabella, he said, but her voice was not forgotten. Margaret Sullivan's confession has given us redemption. He shared Maria Cruz's words that though learning the truth was devastating, it revealed Isabella had died faithful and courageous, not broken or hopeless. Tears filled the pews, but this time they were tears of release. The investigation had shown that Father Morrison and Robert Hendricks stole over $600,000 from the parish. That money was lost, but Rodriguez reminded them something greater could be restored: integrity and honesty. Parishioners stood spontaneously during prayers, asking forgiveness for years of silence. Afterward, the crowd gathered in the garden. Isabella's father, Carlos, spoke with dignity. For years we thought our daughter abandoned her faith. Now we know she died defending it. That truth has healed wounds we didn't even know we carried. Bells from every church in Millbrook tolled in unison as the fountain was blessed, its water flowing as a sign of enduring remembrance. That evening, Rodriguez knelt before Isabella's statue, whispering thanks for her courage and the lesson she had left them. Silence in the face of evil is complicity. Rising, he noticed a white rose left by a child with a note tied to the stem. Dear Isabella, I want to be brave like you when I grow up. Love, Emma, age 8. Sacred Heart. Parish had finally remembered, and in remembering, found redemption.